Shalom, I'm Rabbi Michael Panitz speaking to you from the pulpit of Temple Israel of Norfolk, Virginia. Tonight will be the first of a two-part conversation on lessons from Hanukkah. Tonight we'll talk about lessons from Hanukkah Fact, and next week lessons from Hanukkah Fancy. A balanced life requires both fact and fancy. Without fact, we could not balance the budget or hold down a job. Without fancy, the technicolor of our imagination, a key ingredient in our humanity, fades to gray. Judaism nourishes us with both fact and fancy. This is the point missed by the grim fundamentalists of different denominations. They need everything to be fact. A literal 3 days in the literal belly of a literal big fish, or else the story of Jonah is meaningless. Literal walls of water, the Israelites walking dry-shod down the seabed aisle, or else the miracle of Exodus itself is discounted when all of Exodus was a miracle, escaping the world's greatest superpower. My Judaism is all the richer for the permission granted to express itself in fancy as well as fact, in poetry as well as prose, in saga as well as chronicle. Still, the facts count. Contrary to propaganda, there have been Israelites living continuously in Israel for 3,200 years. There was a Jewish temple on Mount Moriah in Jerusalem. That temple, actually the second such temple, i.e. the one built by Zerubbabel and dedicated around 516 before the Common Era. That temple was rededicated by Judah Maccabee and his troops approximately 2185 years ago, on the 25th day of the month Kislev. We will celebrate the anniversary of that rededication on Thursday night, December 10th. We call that Hanukkah. At this time, I will share 4 of the important life lessons that we can glean from the actual history of Hanukkah. And next week, we'll explore the lessons no less important that are encapsulated in our Hanukkah saga. Lesson number 1, freedom is precious, and we sometimes must fight for it. The Maccabees conducted a struggle against the Seleucid tyrant Antiochus IV. The struggle took years. Our soldiers laid down their lives. They did so because that's how important it was to them to be able to practice their religion freely. Antiochus was in power for years before the revolt broke out, but his seizure of the Jerusalem temple and his repurposing it into a pagan shrine was the intolerable act that made accommodation impossible. Lesson number 2. Sometimes we brave the odds. The Maccabees began with asymmetrical resistance because they were few in number and the Syrian Greek armies were much larger. Gradually, the Jewish force became more of a regular fighting force. But the prayer that we recite on Hanukkah tells it true. We were the few and they were the many. That has been a recurrent theme in our history. In 1967, Israel's defenders were the few. The Arab armies trying to annihilate Israel were the many. Why do we brave the odds? Sometimes to survive. Sometimes to survive in the place in which we've chosen to live, rather than to flee. Sometimes to survive as Jews, rather than to seek oblivion in outward conversion. Lesson number 3, resisting oppression. It is a tempting trap to become an oppressor yourself. We need to avoid falling into that trap. Here, the historical proof requires looking at a larger field of view. The Hasmoneans, the kings following Judah Maccabee, after decades of struggle, achieved their independence from the Seleucid state. One of the Hasmonean kings, John Hyrcanus, pursued an intolerant policy of forced conversion. But he was the exception to the rule. In the main, the Hasmoneans presided over a mixed population. So did the Jewish client kings under Rome, until the Romans abolished those kingdoms. That is also the situation in Israel today. Israeli Arabs vote and elect members to the national Knesset. Non-Jews enjoy civil rights in the Jewish state. It is not perfect, but the contrast between that situation and the fate of Jews living in Arab countries is striking. Israel's Jewish population increased more than fourfold in the first 5 years of the new state's existence, because Jewish refugees were forced to flee their countries of domicile in North Africa and the Middle East. Those Jews saw their civil rights evaporate in 1948, despite many centuries of residence in the countries that they had called home. The mitzvah to wield power justly rather than chauvinistically is rooted in the Bible. God repeatedly commands us to love the non-Israelite residing in our midst. The land laws of Leviticus attest that non-Israelites had the standing to own land. So different from the restrictions imposed on Jews by the church in the Middle Ages. How ironic that the church regarded itself in those centuries as, quote, the true Israel, and yet violated the Bible's commandments, allowing others to live and enjoy rights within the community. Lesson number 4. Life is a balance of the old and the new. Here we need to remember not only the victory of the Hasmoneans that Hanukkah celebrates, but also the fact that Hanukkah became a holiday at all. Since when does a general institute a Jewish holiday? That wasn't the biblical pattern. God ordained Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot, according to the 5 books of Moses. It's different here. The book of 1 Maccabees reports that Judah instituted Hanukkah. 2 Maccabees puts a different construction on it, saying that Judah's initiative was seconded by popular consensus. But in either case, the proclamation of Hanukkah as a holiday by people, not by God, bears some resemblance to Purim, but none to the classic Jewish holidays. What Judah did, in fact, was an echo of non-Jewish practice. Pagan generals instituted pagan festivals in the Hellenistic nations surrounding the Jews. Conclusion: the very fact of Hanukkah, that it became a holiday, shows that the Jews of that generation had adapted to the different conditions of life in the post-biblical period. Hanukkah, it's not just spinning tops and dancing lights. It's real people making tough choices in real times. That is called history. Happy Hanukkah.